Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. The goal of this podcast is to demystify therapy, what can happen in therapy, and the wide array of conversations you can have in and about therapy. Through personal experiences, guests will talk about therapy, their experiences with it, and how psychology and therapy are present in many places in their lives. With lots of authenticity and a touch of humor, here is your host, Steve Bisson.
Je vous remercie, Mr. Announcer, and welcome to episode 122. If you haven't listened to episode 121 yet, Jenny Helms-Calvin was on. She was amazing. I follow her on social media. Got to meet her. She's an amazing interview. She's starting a group coaching, and I hope you go and listen to that episode. You'll hear more about it. But episode 122 is a follow-up of episode 108 with the Mental Men. This is a great group of guys that I've known for years. Dennis Sweeney, who I considered a mentor for many years. He now calls me a colleague, which is always weird. Pat Rice, who has been on 9 episodes, and hopefully he will be back again. Andrew Kang, who is now on number 2 for himself, as well as Dr. Robert Cherney. This is a great group of guys. We talk about different things, and I never know where we're going to go with these interviews, so how about you listen and you tell me what you think. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 122 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I'm bringing back the Mental Men. We were on episode 108, and we didn't even get through half the questions, and now we, as usual, chatted. We've played golf and the whole 9 yards, so now we have about 27 other topics, so this is great for a podcast, but also time management-wise, not so good. But I want to welcome back my guests, Andrew Kang, Robert Cherney, Pat Rice, and Dennis Sweeney. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
You know, just as a quick, I know quick is not something that we do really well here, but quickly, if you can reintroduce yourself, if everyone wants to have a better intro, go to episode 108, but just a quick intro, and we'll start off with Dennis.
Well, Dennis Sweeney, and been a therapist for a very long time now. And my specialty is around addiction and recovery, but I have a pretty much a general mental health practice.
Well, welcome again, Dennis. And I feel like there's going to be a part 3 just based on our 15-minute conversation prior to this. Pat Rice, you're next.
I'm the elder statesman here, although not the longest practicing one, because it was a midlife, mid-30s crisis that ended me in Dennis's office as my intern supervisor. But I developed a practice mostly around trauma and dual diagnosis, and have shifted more recently into wellness, aging, spirituality, grief, loss, and some of that esoterica. And that's about it.
Robert Cherney, or Dr. Robert Cherney. I always forget the doctor part.
Hello, my name is Bob Cherney, and I at this point in my career, and as Dennis put it, it's been a few decades now that I've been practicing. I have the privilege, I think, of doing a couple of things. One is I'm the chief psychologist at a large mental health agency. It's a community mental health agency, which gives me a lot of exposure to many, many different kinds of things, not just social class, psychopathologies, things like that, but it gives me a lot of opportunity to teach, which I really enjoy. And I also have a private practice. So I'm a psychologist as well as a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. So I see a fair amount of dual diagnosis, but I tend to keep my practice limited to adults because children tend to break my heart, and it's difficult.
And forgot to say EMDR practitioner, but I'll plug that for you.
I'm a what kind of practitioner?
EMDR?
Oh, yeah, I do that too. So
nothing like age to forget what you've done.
There you go.
Andrew.
Hey, Steve, thanks for having us again. My name is Andy Kang. I'm a private practice therapist. This is my second career. Also was a lawyer in my past life. Do not regret that decision. So happy to be here. I do also work with people with substance abuse issues. Did my training at Advocates with Bob and Dennis. really taught me a lot, and that's why I'm here with you guys, is to learn more.
Well, I think it's kind of what we were talking about prior. One of the things I realized talking to all of you is that I'm the youngest in this group, which makes me feel young. And also, oh my God, what is our, like, the people behind us, so to speak, coming up? And, part of the stuff we talked about in the episode 108 is the mentorship stuff. I know that me and Andrew take that very seriously. I know that you guys had Dick, who really was supportive of you and kind of like mentorship. And we were talking a little bit about how, we used to think that there were too many therapists coming in, as Robert said earlier, or Bob. I got to stop reading the names on the Zoom thing. But at the end of the day, we always think that, and yet there's always some, young up and coming new people coming in. But we definitely see a shift from one generation to another. I don't know what you guys want to talk about in regards to that, but I think it's important to think about what's next in general, mentorship wise.
That's a very good topic, because I've said to almost anyone that would listen, I think I retired out of the hospital system, where I had an intern program for the same hospital I met Bob and Dennis in, and worked under them as a student. And then I was the guy in charge of the intern system for about 20 years. But that was 10 years ago, 11 years ago, that I said to almost anybody, I really miss the students, because, as Andy said, that's how I learned. I know Andy still teaches at BC in the social work school, and I used to guest lecture for him. I loved it. And it's because it's the best questions. And so one of the things that these types of connections, and the connection that I have with all of you guys, often on a golf course these days as well, is that it keeps it fresh, because I never am without a panel of to throw something by, which is how the Mental Men started, and then expanded into a big peer supervision network. Is that you have to have somebody to share things with, whether it is your personal challenges as they affect your practice, or that when we were meeting live, I remember some of those clinical case presentations where there was genius around listening to the formulations and the other pair of eyes focus. So I really miss it. And I noticed that one of the things that is we shifted away from our old core in the peer supervision network. I've always encouraged students to find that, which is what the intern seminar was about, to begin that process of always having a community, is that there were some of the real newbies that started with us years ago faded fast. They faded out quickly, as opposed to, and so it was kind of the core of the old guard. It's changed now, thank goodness. But I really miss the teaching aspect of it, and value so much these connections, because it helps to keep it fresh.
We used to really maybe get more of that in the office.
Yeah.
Having been
Live.
back to the office this year really has been useful for that. But when we weren't in the office, it was tremendously isolating. So it was even more important to see people and to talk about what's going on. But I have ongoing supervision that I pay for, so that I, in addition, just to have a specific outlet to discuss cases and to run issues by. But the peer supervision is really important too. So I think we can't ever get enough. But in terms of helping the younger folks, I just try to be available. I just try to take all questions at equal value and weight, and try to give the best advice I can to people. It's funny, because as therapists, we really withholding advice a lot of the time. We're holding back our reins, but in supervision it's almost the opposite. It's sort of, you get to say what you think a lot more, which I kind of like.
I think I'll jump on that, because I've had interns now for at least 15 years, or maybe 20 years, and I really have come to the conclusion that it's rejuvenating. there's an energy that flows back and forth between whatever I am, the teacher, I suppose I'd call it, to the students and the younger folks who are basically coming into the field, which I find really encouraging on the one hand, because there's so much enthusiasm and so much intelligence, and it's a wonderful way to do it. But one of the things I do, I've really come to understand is that as I teach, I learn. And the older I get, the more I realize I don't know. And so it's a good thing that I keep teaching on the one hand, but this translates into something I always say: there are no stupid questions. Because if I'm doing a group, especially now that we're doing things on Zoom a fair amount, there might be 30 people in the room, so to speak. And people, I'll notice certain people will just kind of like not talk. And I know they have something to say because I've talked to them in person. And so when I do this, I often will just watch the screen and look for facial changes and things. So then when people, scrunch up their mouth or they tilt their head, and then I'll call on them. And of course, they come forth with something that's really an interesting point. And I'm always struck with how much knowledge and wisdom is in the room, no matter how old people are. And that's what I love, because you come out of it feeling, again, like, wow, we've got a great team here. They have a lot to offer, and I'm glad I'm part of it.
Bob, I was bummed that my son Joey decided not to go train with you guys, because I wanted him to be kind of at your knee for a while and to get his clinical training. He ended up going to a school where he's going to actually be able to do working with teams, which is really more what he wants to do. But I knew that was good, that would be good for him, and that he would get a lot of great mentorship and information just doing those clinical hours. But he made the choice.
Well, he's always welcome back, Andy.
There'll be more opportunities, I'm sure.
All he's got to do is give me a call, and he's got a job if he wants it. So I really hope he has a great experience. It's, you got to make a choice about that kind of stuff. And he's wise. I think there's, that's where he's going to have stuff that he really is interested and passionate about. The community mental health system gives you a very broad range of experience, which is wonderful. But it also, the way I say it is, sometimes we have to throw people into the deep end of the pool, even though they're not as experienced as I'd like them to be. So there's trade-offs, but you learn.
Well, I think that being thrown into the deep end of the pool is exactly what the community mental health system is, and in a good way, because this is where you learn what you don't like and what you like and what others can bring to you. One of the things that I still remember to this day, and is sitting in that room with you in Marlboro and having a bunch of people throw ideas out. I think even of our supervision, when we used to have it more formally as a peer support system, it was always interesting to have Pat would bring, and again, I'm going to give examples that are true. I think that Pat has a lot more of a spiritual sense to what is going on, which is very important in therapy. And I'll stand behind that until someone proves me wrong. Dennis is much more grounded and is also able to look at things from that perspective. I'm more of a, instinctual kind of like, I just say, I blurt it out. It's called straight to the point therapy for a reason. But that sometimes can be bad, and learning to be grounded is something Dennis has really taught me. And, at the end of the day, I think that when you talk about peer support, and I think Andy was mentioning that, is that when we have other peers, there's so much in the room that we get to a different point of view. And I don't know, Dennis, what you think, but I think that that's what I feel like the peer support can be beneficial to us.
I think the peer support is extremely beneficial, in part because it gives people in the group, but also the individuals, an opportunity to sort of bounce things off. And the important part of that bouncing off is being able to take what comes back, and being able to learn from that. And when one of the things that I've tried to impart over the years to interns or people who are new in the field, but I guess for all of us as we're evolving in the field, is that to go along with what you said, Bob, the importance of learning, and that one of the things that I was taught very early on is that the most important thing that you should take as reward for what you do is what you learn, both about yourself and about your craft, what you're doing, what you know, how you can help people. Because that's the most significant way that you're going to help people is by continuing to learn.
Mm-hmm. Just as a comment to piggyback on that, Dennis, because I think it's a great point. We actually have now within the clinics, we have 4 clinics with about 100 clinicians. We have peer support groups. So no longer we have the supervision groups, consultation groups with a more senior person running them. And then they've started peer support. And I think it's wonderful because one of the things that I try to impart is to people when we're talking in supervision or just in the hallway, frankly, or in the kitchen, be open and honest and you'll learn, because a lot of people think, oh my God, I'm supposed to know everything, or I shouldn't feel this way, or I have no idea what to say. Well, I don't know one therapist in the world that hasn't had those feelings at times. And so a lot of people, when they have a peer supervision group, they can really, I think, open up and be more vulnerable, which I think is extremely important. And like you said, you can give it out, but be ready to, absorb it back in and take it in when somebody gives you feedback. And it's a wonderful way to learn. So
I'll add that when I started with you guys, I was 40 years old, I think, when I was licensed, but I started out in my late 30s as a student. It was an extraordinary system we had there with study groups and book groups, and it was remarkable, which I carried forward. It's the only way I knew how these things could run. I encouraged every group of students, and I have 4 or 5 each year, to network with each other, and they've stayed in touch. And this is a plug for you, Steve. I don't know, this may be my 7th or something like that, 7 or 8 of these podcasts, and I send them to all my students, and they love them. And I hear back, and I'm mentoring more now. And Zoom is a wonderful thing because they're all over the country, literally. And they've stayed in touch with their groups, which I encourage them to do. They're friends. They go to each other's weddings and things like that. And that community, I can remember just recently, actually, thinking about, how smart everyone is. And the young people have a fresh pair of eyes. The younger clinicians have a fresh pair of eyes. And many a time in Dennis's office, when we were doing the supervision live, Mark or someone else would jump in with a formulation. And I go, I never even considered that, and then I thought to myself, I'm really surrounded by some really smart people. And as you guys know me well, I'm not afraid to ask a question. I'm kind of, I'm really open to that because I've said that so many times, and I love the dialogue. And my old mentor, all of us who knew Dick Fleck, who was a chaplain and a wonderful man who was on the teams that we started with as a psychologist, actually. But he used to always be referring to the fact that, we have to stay grounded in our own humility, and that we don't know as much as no one can be on top of everything. But we learn in a community. And he was also the one that I think instituted the secondary initial diagnosis. Everybody that came in had some Axis 1 diagnosis, and then it was unresolved grief. And I've learned that's one of the vulnerabilities, is that I always have to, for me, I'll speak, I have to manage my grief, whatever it is. I grieve. That's why I don't treat young people with opiate addictions anymore. I probably 200 of them I lost, and the last one broke my heart, as it broke almost every heart in Natick, as I recall. But it's just you have to know your limits, and being humble, and being able to share my limits with with compassionate and smart guys like you and gals and women that we've have in our world as well, in our peer supervision network. It's been invaluable. But the students love these podcasts. They do, and they look forward to them. So I never said that to you, I don't think, Steve. And I want to just let you know, I send it to all my former students, and it's kept me in touch with them, and it's kept them in touch with each other, because they send it with a big thing, so they all have each other's emails. So, yeah,
And I know why I have downloads in Chicago.
that's right.
But
Did you tell Pat? Did you tell Pat about the royalties, Steve?
Oh, there's no royalties yet. They start in 2065, I believe.
The royalties is the knowledge that I take away, and the friendship that I have with you fellas. That's the royalty.
Yeah, they are royal. That's great. Yeah,
and I think that that's the greatest thing, right? I mean, one of the things that I truly enjoy, and we were talking about this prior again. You guys have started to, Pat gave me new clubs, and I finally can hit a golf ball straight and in like with enough authority to not play 17 times on a par 3.
Not bad for lefties, just saying.
Just exactly. I mean, Phil Mickelson will be calling me any second now. But the royalties that I've had with this great group, and this is something that I constantly think about, is that one of the things that Dennis taught me, whether he knows it or not, and this is what, we keep on saying about the gifts that give. Dennis is the one who taught me a very, very young time in my career that what I know fits in a thimble, and I got to be open to other ideas. And when I was full of piss and vinegar, when I was like 22, 23, I needed someone who grounded me that way. And I think that that's one of the things that happens too, right? With younger therapists is that, well, I've studied CBT. I know everything about CBT. Well, there's a reason why there's about 17 modalities there, buddy. And I don't know if that's something that you've experienced too. And I'll start with Andy about having that different point of view, just bringing us to the enlightenment, for lack of a better word, to I don't know everything.
Yeah, it's I'm constantly getting brutal reminders of that by life. Finding myself in some random dead end that I thought was going to go all the way through, but it was a dead end. But yeah, it's I actually have to be careful with getting too directive. So trying to keep that listening hat on, trying to keep that humility going, and not jumping in with my perceived solution to things. I've found that as my patience dwindles, which of course it does at times, I get more directive, and I really need to try to pull that back. But that's when I hear your guys' voices in my head about, well, you don't really know. Maybe you should ask another question, or maybe you should. I learned this from Dennis too. We all have, but I learned the silence approach works well. Sit there if you have to, wait it out, because it doesn't feel. It feels much longer than it really is. Just letting that space breathe. A lot of times the person's coming up with something in that space. I don't think that answered your question, but
we're not here to answer questions. We're here to get royalties, as I understand.
Andy, you write a check for 0.5 cents.
I think those are great comments. So that whole idea of like being patient, that's something I've had to learn, and it's coming.
The Buddhist says that the highest form of prayer is patience.
Yeah.
And it's my entire life. That's probably the single biggest thing that Dennis taught me. Early on was the beauty of just silence and being patient, and let if you can allow I think Dennis was the one that said it, but it might have been Dick that said we give everybody two titles here. One is a job description and one is their title. And it's the same word, patient. When you're in healing mode, you have to be patient. And it's It's when we were talking earlier about vulnerability and powerlessness and all of that in our own lives and with our patients. Andy talked about the power of gratitude. It's a grounding thing. It keeps us grounded in the moment. But I have a quote that I think of constantly, a lot, from the fabulist Aesop, who wrote all the fables. And he is attributed with saying that gratitude is what makes what you have right now enough. And we think about being forward thinking and wanting more of this and more of that, more knowledge and everything. But if I can't be in this present moment, and especially sitting with a client or patient, if I can't say that what I have to offer them is enough right now, and if I have a skill set, and sometimes it is just keeping my mouth shut and letting them figure it out. And what I do, I bring energy in. And if there's one thing I miss the most about Zoom telemedicine as opposed to in the office, and I really don't practice in an office anymore, is I miss the energy exchange. I have to work very hard in this format here. I know you guys so well that it's there. But for someone, especially that I don't know as well as I'd like to, I'm missing a lot, I think. It takes longer to get a sense of them and get kind of an intuitive sense of how I can be of assistance. And sometimes I used to ask that quite quickly as to how do you find that I can help you? It takes a little bit longer before I feel they have a sense of that. But most of it is to just be kind. The old Buddha's loving kindness, just be kind and patient and show up and be professional. Kindness goes a long way, though, as when you've been on the other side of healthcare, a warm blanket in an emergency room and some kindness goes a long way. And we provide that in our own ways. And I'll say one last thing. Every student that will hear this knows I've said that. I probably have said it in every class I taught with Andy's students at Boston College as well, is that when you don't know what to do next, just be kind. Because you may be meeting someone, you may not know it, but it may be the worst day of their life. And that used to happen in the emergency room a lot. And I'm pretty sure Dennis taught me that. So it could have been Dick again. I can't remember. It was such a rich environment. I can't remember. As Dick used to say, if you steal from everybody, it's just research, not plagiarism.
That's great. I couldn't agree with you more, Pat. The fancy word we use is therapeutic alliance for this kind of stuff. And yet the basis of healing, I'm very convinced after almost 40 years, is as Carl Rogers would say, kind of the essence of the personality of the therapist to some extent. It's important that you're kind, that you're patient, that you allow enough space for that person to come forth, that's sitting across from you, so to speak. And I think that the gratitude you're talking about is so interesting because that's one of the things that goes against capitalism right now. It's never enough. And I really struggle with, clients struggle with it. And, you have to decide, all right, is this something that's, as they say, a first world problem? Is it something that's really, a necessity? And you see the stark difference between the community mental health system and private practice. And it's fascinating, but it's also, you got to keep yourself in check because, when I get frustrated, sometimes I just sit back and I say, what purpose does this behavior or this attitude serve in the person's life? Because they're holding on to it so strongly that it must be something they're awfully afraid to give up. And it's just one of those simple things. But again, the last thing I'll say is that when I talk to my students, I always say, if you remain curious and humble, you'll never get bored in this profession. And
No.
the knowledge base is just expanding so quickly now. It's wonderful.
One of the things that I want to throw in a little behavioralism here is that people don't repeat behaviors that didn't pay off. And even if it didn't pay off the way they wanted, it paid off in somehow. And I kind of look and very curious as to what the payoff was for XYZ and what the motivation can be based on that. Behavior, I think I've been a little bit more looking into behavioralism. Maybe it's just the times, but I also tell people that people don't learn from behaviors, they learn from consequences. And it's important to remember that, what's his name? Skinner had something in mind when he created that operant conditioning system. And I want to also mention that it was, we have a great camaraderie here, and I always enjoy that. But it's always nice. I want to note this because it's important. I think all of us have just given lots of flowers to Dennis, and I think Dennis, they're well deserved. And I want to make sure that I mention that because this is not something that we do just to give a tribute to Dennis, but we all mean it. And I also think that the sincerity of relationships is also very important when you do peer supervision and stuff like that. So thank you for expressing your gratitude, guys.
This, one thing that happens that I've just been aware of it here is that just revisiting these things keeps it fresh. Because I've forgotten most everything. I have to keep relearning. And I'm pretty sure it was, one of the great psychiatrists was Dr. John Schott, that I got the privilege of working with and listening to and reading his formulations, reading his notes, and that impeccable long cursive handwriting. And I think he was the one that taught us that. The one question, when you don't know what's going on, ask yourself one last question when you're looking at a patient that you're meeting maybe for the first time, or is there any unhealthy gain to them? Steve, you're reminding me of that. But is there an unhealthy gain or payoff for the patient to retain their symptoms? And that is still one of my default settings, is that when I'm always trying to figure out, the simplest thing, Occam's razor, what's the simplest thing that explains everything? Often it's alcohol, or something like that. But what could be any unhealthy pattern that is developed in this person's life for them not wanting to give up this, fear? There's always a fear of change. Was it Joseph Campbell, that the historian, that said that the mythology historian said that the cave you fear to enter holds the treasures that you seek. And that's got to be something from the Sufis. It's so ancient. But it's the truth, is that we're supposed to sit with somebody at times, or try to help them face their fear, because that is the liberation. And sometimes that is meaning to tell the story. They're even afraid to tell the story. So these are the little nuggets that every time I get together with you fellows, they come back to me. And those are the things that sustain my ability to be useful, I think, to people. But that's why I value it so.
I've been telling. Go ahead, Dennis.
I was thinking that over the years, and Pat, you and I had this side conversation a number of years ago, where you would come across somebody that you didn't know or remember, and this person was really angry with you, and you had no clue why. And I remember having this discussion that over the years, and I appreciate the feedback that folks have given me today, but over the years, there are people that consider me the devil, because part of my job is not only to help people come to face with their fears, but to understand what those fears mean and to try and let them go. And letting things go is tremendously difficult and can call up some really significant anger. And so that's I think part of the sort of the underpinning dynamic to what we do is helping people to figure out what do you need to let go of. And it sort of links to something that I hadn't thought of it in quite this way, but even in people's introduction, recognizing when is it time to stop? When is it time to change? When is it time to stop being an attorney? And when is it time to work on being a therapist? When is it time to make a shift to midlife, make a decision to become a therapist? We go through these challenges of when is it time to stop throughout our lives. And don't tell me I have to stop, because I do not want to stop.
And I don't like you for telling me that. You
Well,
know,
it's-
Just who
our
do you think
students
you are?
our students are, to take it back to the mentorship for a second, they're so in fear of that reaction that and they're so under pressure internally to be right, and that's just that's leading them and the client in the wrong direction, where that the humility and curiosity is really the place to be, so that the person can really explore, and then you don't have to tell them anything.
Exactly. And that's where it's important, is that you're not telling them anything, you're asking them to ask themselves, is it time to stop?
Right.
But that's, I've seen that a lot. The younger people that I work with, the more severe that issue is for them in engaging in this work, is that, you know, they're under so much pressure. It's life and death. I mean, the stuff we do is critical, but also if you coming in with that kind of pressure preloaded, it makes the job a lot harder.
Yeah.
So trying to get them in check with their own feelings and their own past is the journey that we've all been on. We're still on it.
But I think it's also built in. And I'll give you the example. And I'm going to say this is truly part of what happened to me. And it happened to a lot of people I've mentored across throughout the years, is that if I'm setting, and, you know, I sat with Dennis when I was doing my internship and then started at a community mental health. I sat with Bob at community mental health a few times. One of the things that we go in at school is that you can't be wrong. And now I can't look bad in front of Bob or Dennis. They're experienced therapists. They're going to roll their eyes. They're going to look at me. They're going to judge me. They're going to do whatever. And for the record, Dennis and Bob and Pat and Andy have never judged me once. But that's kind of what it brings. A little bit of the education sometimes brings that thought that, like, you got to be so formulated, because they're getting ready for their dissertation or they're getting ready for what have you. If I'm wrong, they're going to call me on it. Well, guess what? We're all wrong most of the time. I coach a bunch of young girls for soccer for the last 10 years. And every month, if not more, when I'm coaching them, I say, look, if I don't make 10 mistakes in a day, I've had a pretty good day. That it's just life. And I think that part of what you're talking about being a good mentor, being a good supervisor, and even a good teacher is to say, look, you're going to be wrong a whole lot, but you're going to probably be right more often than you're wrong. And that's okay, because that's what we're here for. That's why we're supporting each other. And that's why it is life or death sometimes. But most of the time it can be fixed, because the words, sorry, I was wrong, is not that hard for me. But it was very hard when I was a little young and full of piss and vinegar. And I knew everything, because I was 24 and I knew absolutely everything. And at 48, I'm like, my God, was I ignorant? And I still am so much more ignorant than I used to be. And I think that humbling experience is so helpful to remember.
Yeah, it's it is humbling. It's so important, I think, that when I look back at some of the seminal things I learned, is that to the pain that Dennis used to get this when, as a student in doing groups together, he used to get this funny little look that I learned very quickly meant that I was making big mistakes. You get a little curious, and I knew it was going to be a great session afterwards. But sometimes when I remember it was he that said this, and I'm sure you stole it from somebody, Dennis. We all steal it, but I was glad to have heard it. That you're not going to learn much from what you know how to do already. You'll only learn a lot from what mistakes you make. Somewhere along the line, and it could have been my other mentor, who told me that there's hardly a greater pain that you can experience as an intelligent person to make the same mistakes over and over, which is what I'm a recovering addict and alcoholic for many decades. And, that's part of the self-forgiveness of the 12-step paradigm, is to forgive yourself for being so breathtakingly imperfect at times. But you can learn a lot from making a mistake only once and learning from it. And that's what I've always tried to encourage people to do, whether they're students or when I used to lecture Andy's class, he's seen this. I'd walk around in the circle there, and I would not let people not be engaged. Come on, take a chance. You can't be wrong. Trust me, you can't be wrong. And they would take a chance, and I'd say, that's a great, of course. And then it'd start something. And you could see the relief, but also the moment of, oh, that's powerful. That moment when they suddenly realized, I have something to offer. And that's when they awakened. And when we've all seen that with patients, when all of a sudden the light comes back, or with students, when you take someone in a position to just be there when someone starts to come back, when the hope pilot light comes on, if that doesn't get you going, that still keeps me going, is that when you see that emanation coming out of people. And these ideas, when people can break the fear paradigm, I studied many years ago to become an astrophysicist, really, until advanced calculus threw me in a different trajectory. But everything in the universe is energy. It matters. You take a little thing that's an atom, you break one of those in half and the city disappears when you release that energy. And sometimes, as Dennis was alluding, the power, is that I have done that. I have been the one that they attributed to being the cause of their misery at that moment. But it was simply, and often later on, they would say, it hurts a lot. I was so overwhelmed by it, but you were right. I know you were right. And sometimes you don't get that, but that's part of what we do. I had to learn, and you fellows taught me a lot, is to not be afraid to try things. And with good counsel and supervision, and groundedness in a kind of a spiritual core, meaning knowing myself and liking myself, and knowing there was more to all of this than just this one transaction. I felt that I could be helpful, and I've only tried to pass that on. And I also know one last thing, I'm dominating here, forgive me, is that I've told every student, because it was told to me, if you're not authentic and taking your own advice, you won't have any credibility. That bumper sticker, take my advice, I'm not using it, doesn't fly at all in healthcare. And so I really, and peers like this keep me honest with that. Some of the more dark moments when I think I've made mistakes, even in recent years, someone on this panel here would be someone I would talk to and have to be talked off my own ledge of imperfection. I'll just put in a plug for a book you all know well, but if someone hasn't read it out there and they listen to this podcast, it's called, if you're a recovering person, it's called The Spirituality of Imperfection. And it's coming to peace with the fact that the only way you learn is by making mistakes. So the only thing we do perfectly is be imperfect. And that's hard for some folks to the tyranny of perfectionism in so many ways. So Forgive me, I go off every now and then.
I love your stuff, Pat. It's great.
A soliloquy.
I could listen all day.
Yeah, me too. I like it.
One of the truisms that I was taught early on is that the only real mistake we ever make is one we don't recognize.
Yeah. Boy, that's really, I'd like to jump on that because, both, you're all talking about how we have to let go, or letting go is so difficult. It is so difficult because there's such a fear of, so if I don't do that, at least one of the fears, and I've learned this both professionally and personally. So what the hell am I supposed to do if I let that go? That's been a go-to. Booze is like this. Hey, what's my answer to this? I think I'll take a drink or five. And there's a lot of that I've seen in my family, and it's just a matter of trying to figure out: do we need to replace the unhealthy habit with healthier coping skills? And for some people, I think we do. need to help them learn not only that this is destructive, this one's destructive on this side, but can we actually provide some hope that there's some different way of doing things that can be useful for them and get them to a different place that's going to be much less painful and much more fulfilling. And an example of this is something that I'm smiling because I have a very interesting family and I've learned a lot of things. One of the things I learned was anticipate the negative. And it's such an interesting thing because if I was raised Catholic, and one of the things is, don't worry, don't get too happy. Things are going to go bad. you're going to suffer at some point soon. And I think it's such an interesting thing because depending on your family, and especially if you grow up in a dysfunctional family, what you learn is to be scanning, I call it. And you scan for the negative to happen. And if you do that, guess what? You're going to find some. And the problem is, though, it takes you out of the moment. I think, Pat, you were talking about this. It takes you out of the moment. And it's so nice when you can just let go and be. And if something happens, then you can deal with it. But to let go of that anticipatory kind of urgency or the anxiety, it's fascinating how much room that takes up and how much energy it takes up. And letting it go is it's relieving. But you got to keep on working it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're letting go. We see a lot now, and I know some of you are advocates as well of the manifestation, philosophy that what if you're absorbed in something, you can manifest it. If you're giving off positive energy, you will attract positive energy. My old mentor Dick told me this. He said I was going to be in a conference in the city, and he said, "Okay." He said, you want to test this? He said, for 3 city blocks at noontime, when you go out for your break, for 1 block, go scowl at people, just look menacing. The next block, give them the 1,000-mile neutral stare. And for the next block, smile at everybody, nod, say hello, see what you get back. It's stunning. We get back. And so I've taken a lot of time to not focus on outcomes that I don't want. Focus on the outcomes that I do want. And that's, the manifestation business. That is putting out energy that then attracts the same energy.
I had a guy just the other day say to me, a patient talking about anxiety, and he said, I can't let go of my anxiety because my anxiety is always right. In other words, what he meant by that is everything I'm worried about always happens because I'm smart and I'm thinking ahead and I can see what's coming. And I didn't have a response right away to that because I had never heard it put that way before. But it's what you're talking about, Pat, about manifesting. It's about, what are you putting out there that's also coming back your way? But he's viewing it as he's excluded himself from the equation and it's all just stuff that's happening to him. And he doesn't want to let go because it's his predictive mechanism. He's actually, to your point, Steve, about what's the payoff? He gets knowledge of the future out of it. He gets actual predictability out of it, which makes some weird sense. But it was just fascinating to hear it that way. I'd never heard it like that before.
Well, self-fulfilling prophecy is what that is.
Yeah.
And
has anyone ever made a 18-inch putt that you knew as you stood over it, you weren't going to make it?
Not yesterday.
I think that's what it is. I was going to say, okay, so when we play golf, it's going to go straight, it's going to go left, it's going to go right, or it's going to hit the water or the sand. Here we go. I predicted what's going to happen. Yeah, because you made 5 predictions. So, of course, one of them happens to be right. And you're going to omit the 4 that were wrong. You're going to say, see, that one was right. I knew it. So that's what I talk about. When I tell my clients, I've had a few anxious clients who didn't put it exactly that way. But I said, well, if you make 15 predictions, there's a likelihood that one of them will be right. And you'll omit what was wrong in order to say, look, I can predict the future. So that's how I challenge that personally. But I wanted to jump to something else because one of the things we kind of all alluded to is that as therapists, we're not perfect. And what I also think is important to realize is that I was sitting here prior to the interview, even before you came on, I'm like, all five of us have stuff going on that are not related to therapy, that are outside of us, and that's our private lives. And, Pat started off by saying, oh, if I'm distracted, something's going on in my life. I'm not here to put anyone out, so I'm not saying what that is. If he wants to share, that's up to him. But I think that we were all talking about that. And I think it's important, like, when I say finding your way through therapy in this podcast, I keep in mind that we need to also lift the veil that therapists are human. And that sometimes for me, like, right now I'm good. I like, but there's times where I'm like sitting with a client or sitting with my peers and I'm already thinking about, all right, well, oh, this is going to happen or what have you. I'm probably looking at surgery in the next few weeks myself. And so sometimes like, oh, how am I going to manage this? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm in my head. I'm no longer doing two things at once. It's not possible because I'm not paying attention to the person in front of me, whether it's therapy, whether it's a peer, or whether it's just my kids or my life in general. And I think I want to humanize that in a little bit and talk about our powerlessness as therapists sometimes too.
The knowledge of who I am isn't up here. It's in the heart. There's been so much study and talk about the heart as an organ, but it's also a part of our centeredness in what we are. It's what makes us smile at little babies and kittens and all of the things that people find heartwarming, literally. And I think I've learned over the years, more recently, I've been focusing on trying to get people out of the head, which is where anxiety and fear lives. Forgive me, I'll be indelicate. My term for it is the itty bitty shitty committee that keeps rattling around, and it's a stress engine. And to get people out of that, there's an ingenious thing that forget who came up with it. It'll come to me, but it was Eckhart Tolle. I think he's Swiss, but it's a quick breathing technique, and then you basically think about evaporate the last thought, and then wait for the next thought to come in your mind. Nothing comes because you've changed it out of the head and into the body and into the heart. It's an ingenious way, but it's just getting out of that perseverating thoughts that we hear about all of the time. Where I forget, it must have been a Buddhist or a Sufi quote that worrying about tomorrow or what's in the future doesn't change it. It just changes today for the worse. It takes peace of mind out of today. So these are the techniques, and my techniques have to do with breath work and the energy work and things like that can get people kind of oriented to thinking more, being more in their heart and letting that direct action as opposed to the head. But there is, for people that are really smart, sometimes that's an illusion of control, is that I know what's going to happen next. There's no point to me saying that because I know what they're going to say. And really,
there also is a dynamic of control of ourselves, and that I do believe very firmly that when we're sitting in therapy, and one of the core elements to professionalism as a therapist and a capacity that allows people to stay as therapists is that when you're distracted like that, when you're feeling at your worst, it's when you can sort of buckle down and focus the most and stay with the patient, stay with the client. If you can't do that, you won't last. It's one of those things that I believe is it's an absolute requirement. And that's about self-control. It's about recognizing what not only can I do, but what I need to do. If I'm going to be able to successfully stay in this kind of practice for any length of time. And that is I think that's also one of the core elements of burnout over time, is that we do have to put that energy in.
It's interesting, Dennis. I think that whole self-control, the ability to kind of align yourself with what is in front of you. What is the goal? What is my task? what's happening right now. And what I talk to a lot of students about and what I've experienced over the years is that you are living your life outside of the therapy room, and things happen a lot. And for example, say you have a relationship and there's tension and conflict in that relationship. You're walking into your therapy office trying to figure out, all right, I'm going to center myself. I'm going to calm myself, and I'm going to put that off to the side. We have the fancy name of compartmentalization, but that's not an easy thing to do, especially if you get triggered by someone who's talking about the fact that they're struggling with their wife or husband or partner. And so I agree with you with 100%. And it is a discipline that over time you learn, but it does take a lot of energy at times.
You compartmentalizing is, I agree, 100% required for the job. But at the same time, trying to be a human being in the room requires, for me, and I'll myself here, and I know that not everybody agrees with this dogmatically, but requires to some degree a sharing of yourself. That in order, so often I'll weave in a story, or I will share something about what's going on in my life, and I find nearly 100% of the time I know which clients can take it and which ones can't. Let's just put it that way. But the ones who can, and who they actually crave it, they actually want to know more about you, and then that presents a whole nother roster of issues about what's appropriate and what isn't. But I find that tends to be connective tissue for the relationship, because it's a relationship, and it can't just be, in my estimation, one way, which is how I think we wanted to do it 50 years ago. It wanted it to be on the couch and one way, and don't ever look at me and don't ask me any questions. But if we want to be humans and we want to work with other humans and have real relationships, it's got to be more two-way. And so I try to invite that, but it requires quite a bit of finesse to not go over, to not, be triggering yourself by interposing your own set of feelings and circumstances. But you do learn how to get better at it.
Yeah, and that's where staying focused on that skill, regardless of what's going on outside, finding that balance, that's critical. And
yeah. Andy, it's a wonderful point. And I think that people can tell if you're being authentic. And the authenticity, I think, builds the relationship, and sharing at times. It strengthens the therapeutic alliance, the bond, whatever you want to call it, that happens in this room, the energy between you. But again, like you said, it requires discretion and discernment. And it's really a matter of trying to figure out what would benefit this person. I will share if this is going to be helpful for that person, and if not, then don't. But it is an interesting question. But I agree 100%.
And sometimes it's at a moment where the patient needs to learn, to be reinforced that you are just as imperfect as they are. You just have a certain set of skills they don't have. They have their own skills. And there are those moments. I learned it from a student, actually. My very first student. I came in, I was working till 11 o'clock at night, and I was in the hospital at 7 the next morning. I was a bit of an overworker in those days. And but she looked at me at 7 a.m. and she was heading over to the ER and said, "You look really tired." And I get defensive, like I'm not supposed to be tired and everything. And then I finally did it. No, you're absolutely right. I'm exhausted. And so I'm going to let you go over and so you come back and if you need some help with this or something. And that was a moment I realized is that it was my first student, and I was in a more of trying to orient myself to my persona as teacher or mentor. And I've learned that with my patients as well. There are times they just need to know, because some have asked me, I mean, do you ever have problems? And I go, oh my God, yeah, but my job is not have you take care of me, and you're very good at taking care of other people. So, oh yeah, and pointing out to them that this is not new. It feels very unique to you because you've never experienced it, but this is all too common. The hardest thing to do as a human being is something unique. With 7 billion of us on the planet at this moment in time, everyone goes through a lot of their own stuff. Everyone has to deal with things. And I don't know if compartmentalize is a word I would have used, but I know when I need to leave it on the other side of the door. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And which is, as I've said, practicing at home is harder, in a home office situation, because everything is just on the other side of the door. It's not 20 miles away or whatever. And which is why sound machines work just as well in a home office as they do everywhere else. It's just to keep a barrier, like a white noise barrier on the other side of it. But I had to learn to become, I was taught to become human in a way. And if I'm operating motivated by just trying to be helpful and utilizing the skills that I've been taught, my boundaries are good. I probably can't make a mistake with a little bit of kind of generic self-disclosure. It's like when you decide with a male or female, you're going to wear a wedding ring. That's information. We used to think you couldn't share anything. That's not the way I don't think the way it's done now. And especially with Google and other things, people can find out all kinds of stuff, about you. So.
One of the things I was taught is that you can pretty much share anything as long as you are ready to deal with the reaction.
I've heard that before.
Great comment, Dennis.
Yeah.
Right.
From the same source. That's right.
But I think it's also, you talked about different types of things that we believe in. I believe in the law of attraction in the sense that you'll attract the right people who will be able to take that information. And it's also the discernation, the I can't find the word, I'm saying it in French, but being able to tell that, with Dennis today talking about my own stuff is not a good idea, but Pat is okay. And Bob is, I don't know, we'll see if I just put a feeler out there. And we get that clinical experience, but we can't have, going back to a little bit of what we talked about earlier, we can't have those feelers without knowledge and being able to make those mistakes. I'm trying to put a little bow on it because I'm looking at the time. We already filled an hour. And because we're not busy at all, we all have places to go and things to do. So again, I had another 7 questions. We got to 2 per usual. So, guys, the new season's going to be starting in January. This is October, but in January, and I'm obviously going to reinvite all of you, and I want to be respectful of your time. So I want to say again, thank you. I should be on the golf links in 2 weeks. Hopefully we can still play. And I'm looking forward to that. But again, thank you for coming to Finding Your Way Through Therapy, and hope you enjoyed your experience. Well, this concludes episode 122. Dennis Sweeney, Pat Rice, Dr. Robert Cherney, and Andrew Kang. Thank you so much. We're going to have this again. We can never get through all the questions, but that's just par for the course for the guys that we are. But episode 123 will be with a comedian, and I'm looking forward to meeting him on a podcast because Brad Mastrangelo is someone that I've known because I worked with his wife for a long time. So I hope you join me for that next interview.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States.